Republicans versus Democrats. It's a conflict as old as cats versus dogs. But sometimes the biggest conflicts are within the respective parties themselves, especially when the margins of majority are close. Republicans and Democrats are fighting within their own parties for the direction of their parties and the future of the country, the state, and governments across the nation. So what does this intra-party conflict look like? And what does it mean for the future of Pennsylvania politics and the politics of our nation? John Cole, the managing editor of Politics PA, joins us to break down those questions and more. That's all coming up right here, right now. I'm Sam Chen, and this is Face the Issues. Good evening and welcome to Face the Issues. I'm Sam Chen. Republicans versus Democrats is something that we're very familiar with, but the biggest conflict sometimes comes within the party itself. Certainly the case right now is the Democrats have a razor-thin majority of the House of Representatives and only have the majority in the Senate by virtue of Vice President Kamala Harris's tie-breaking vote. And so the fight within the party, as far as direction of the party and direction of the country, is a big conflict. But what does that mean here in Pennsylvania, especially with a governor's seat and a Senate seat coming up in the 2022 elections? John Cole is the managing editor of Politics PA, a friend of this program. He joins us right now. John, welcome back to Face the Issues.
Thanks for having me back, Sam. Looking forward to the conversation.
Same here. Welcome back. And John, let's begin. And I think the easiest way for us to do this is a conflict that both parties are dealing with, this intra-party fight. This is not a Democrat or Republican problem alone. Both parties have this. So let's just take one party at a time. And we'll start with the Democrats. They have the White House right now. They have the governor's mansion in Pennsylvania. They've got the House and the Senate nationally, though by razor-thin margins. There is, and this happens a lot when you're in the majority. There is a sense of, okay, now that we have the majority, there's a fight for whose majority does it become. We saw this with the Republicans in the House a decade ago when the Tea Party caucus, House Freedom Caucus came in, and there's that divide between the Tea Party versus the establishment. And we're seeing it now with the Democrats, right? There's the Justice Democrats, the more socialist Democrats, such as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Bernie Sanders, and so forth. And then your more moderate Democrats, your Connor Lambs and Tim Ryans. This fight is playing out in Pennsylvania, and you're seeing this with who's declared for the governor and Senate races in 2022. What are we seeing right now?
So again, I think it's important to note that this conversation certainly is evolving. And even though we are still in 2021 and these important races are still a year plus away, it's taking place right as we speak, like you said. So we've seen candidates jump in that have formally announced for U.S. Senate and governor. On the Democratic side, like you said, we should start there because the Senate race right now appears to be the more crowded one at this time. Right now for governor, we've not had the same amount of candidates formally declare. We've only heard rumors about people being interested on the Democratic side. But on the Senate race, that's where it seems that's where the action is right now for U.S. Senate. Because Senator Pat Toomey announced he wasn't going to seek a third term. He was originally elected in 2010. And in 2016, when he was reelected by a pretty close margin, but he beat Democrat Katie McGinty from Philadelphia was by a close margin. That was the second most expensive Senate race in the country at that point in that cycle, Sam. So that goes to show you the importance of Pennsylvania. And that's why as we see this fight play out right now for the 2022 race, you're starting to see the field shape out. So, of course, what we've noticed thus far of people that have announced, and again, I'd like to stress, more can join. Mm-hmm. But at this current point in time, we've seen quite a few progressive candidates from the Democratic field formally announced. We had Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman, who is the biggest name in the field thus far. He's the lone statewide official that's currently elected that's seeking the U.S. Senate. He ran in 2016. At that point in time, he was just the mayor of Braddock. Not to belittle Braddock, but it's a smaller town in Western PA. But at the same time, he was not as well known statewide. Now he has that statewide recognition. His quarter one numbers are in, and they were very, very impressive. He raised just shy of $4 million in the first quarter, which his campaign said is the most any candidate has raised in Pennsylvania history for U.S. Senate in their first quarter of their candidacy. He's been in longer than most others. That's a name we had to look out for. And again, he is a progressive guy. He was when he ran in 2016, he backed Senator Bernie Sanders. However, in the 2020 election, you could tell he played the party line more. He didn't go out on a limb to endorse a candidate in the 2020 Democratic primary. His message then was just to beat Trump. And I think to the chagrin of some on the Bernie sector of the party, they don't think he was outspoken enough for those liberal policies, but he's certainly still a progressive Democrat. Other Democrats we've seen that have formally announced some other names to look out for. State Representative Malcolm Kenyatta from Philadelphia. He was an early endorser of Joe Biden, but even though Biden had the reputation of being the moderate candidate in the presidential Democratic primary, Kenyatta is very much a very, very progressive lawmaker from Philadelphia. And some of the early endorsements we've seen from him indicate that he's going to have some support from like the Working Families Party. Some really progressive organizations are kind of lining up behind him. Although, again, it's worth noting that he's rather young, so we don't know. I think he's 31 or 32. He's a rather young lawmaker, so I don't know exactly how much support he will have. But it's worth noting that his first quarter numbers are in. He didn't join the race as early as Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman, so he didn't have the same amount of time to raise funds. But he still raised, I think, just shy of $375,000 in the first quarter, which is still a pretty good amount of money. So we're starting to see that play out. They're the two biggest names thus far that have formally announced bids. Now, there's others that have made moves, like State Senator Sharif Street, who was the vice chair of the Pennsylvania Democratic Party, who was another Democrat. I would say pretty progressive, although I don't know if he would match the level of Kenyatta. That I'm sure could be up for debate. He announced an exploratory committee. He had when he announced his exploratory committee rollout, he had a lot of institutional support. Your Bob Brady's from Philadelphia, other party leaders backing him from different regions of the state. Now, he hasn't formally announced, it's worth noting, but he's a guy who's got, I think the Philadelphia Inquirer report, he's got like 1 foot in officially the race. He doesn't have both feet in because he isn't officially announced, but he has filed with the FEC and he has an exploratory committee. And now we're waiting on Pennsylvania's congressional delegation. Again, there's many more, but let's name some of the other big names that we're waiting to hear from. Your Connor Lambs, for example, out in Western PA. You mentioned him in your opening. A Western PA Democrat from Allegheny County. He represents a district that narrowly went for Biden this time around. In the previous race in 2000 in his boundaries, Trump won those in his boundaries in 2016. Biden narrowly edged out Trump there, but it's still very much a toss-up district in Western PA. Lamb actually had the closest reelection bid of any incumbent Congress member in Pennsylvania in 2020. He narrowly edged out Republican Sean Parnell by a close margin. But Lamb has been mentioned as a potential candidate for U.S. Senate. We're still waiting to hear from him. And of course, redistricting will have a say in that. We could possibly touch on that later. Other names to look out for. Now, he's in Western PA, also in the Southeast. Montgomery County Commissioner Valar Kush also has announced a bid. She's officially in the race. She announced in April, meaning that we have not seen any data yet of her FEC filing, so we don't know how much she's raised yet. She's just in the race now, but she's someone that I think will be able to raise a good amount of money, and it's an important region of the state. Montgomery County, she's the chair of the commissioners board there. That's the third most populous county in the state. Yeah. So it's certainly.
Let me ask you this real quick. Yeah. I mean, I think you mentioned Connor Lamb. Mm-hmm. And John Fetterman, both from Western Pennsylvania. Now, Lamb has there's been this thing between him and Ocasio-Cortez on the direction of the party. And you've mentioned before on the show that someone like an Ocasio-Cortez likely couldn't hold Lamb's district. And it's a very different district. What are the chances for these candidates in a general election, being that Pennsylvania is so diverse? Does someone like Connor Lamb present a better opportunity for the Democrat Party, or does someone like Kenyatta or Fetterman and that more progressive streak have that better chance?
Well, that's the question the Democratic Party in Pennsylvania is currently grappling with. They look at the recent success of Democrats where statewide 2020 wasn't exactly a slam dunk year for Democrats in PA. And I know to those who aren't avid political watchers, they might think, what are you talking about? Joe Biden flipped the state, and he did, which was impressive. But look what also happened. I mean, Josh Shapiro won by a comfortable margin, who, again, is on the more moderate end. So if you're a Democrat who believes moderates are the more moderate candidates are the ones that can win in PA, you point to a Josh Shapiro who won, who had the largest margin of victory of any of the statewide candidates in Pennsylvania in 2020. But then Republicans won the two other races for treasurer and auditor general. But you look at Bob Casey and Governor Tom Wolf both won in 2018. Even though you could say they're not the most liberal Democrats, they both won by double digits. It was a friendly Democratic year, 2018. 2022, we don't know if it's going to be as friendly of a Democratic year. So that's the thing that the party's grappling with now. Is I'm sure there are progressives that point to different Democrats across the state that have won in rather impressive fashion, like like Summer Lee in Allegheny County. She won in a state house seat where she beat an incumbent Democrat. I think in 2018 or 2016. I have to double check on that. But point being, there's progressives who have beaten incumbents. And it's like, wow, that's really impressive that progressives win. But having said that, like you said, they've won in these progressive districts that we don't know if they can win statewide in PA. And that is the argument that's going on right now, is that can they win a primary? Sure. They can definitely. Nina Ahmad is a good example. She won a primary in Pennsylvania as a progressive candidate for auditor general, but she lost the general to Tim DeFore. And she beat out a more moderate Democrat in Western PA in Michael Land, the Pittsburgh City Controller. So right now, that's the debate is ongoing, and we actually will not know the answer truly until 2022 when that primary takes place. But right now, we're starting to see that conversation take place. It's like the direction of the party. I'm sure there's Democrats that, I guess, like in politics, there's a give and take. There's certain issues that a candidate might not embrace that you really wish they would. But it ultimately comes down to, I'm sure, some of these people, can they win statewide? And that's the conversation going on right now for Democrats. And right now, out of the candidates that have declared, it's been a more progressive field. I think it's safe to say. But then again, there's other people that might run. Connor Land would represent more of that moderate wing. Another name to look out for, we don't know if she'll run, but it's pretty noteworthy because of the amount of money she raises. Chrissy Houlihan, the congresswoman from Chester County. She's a veteran, represents a county that even though it's trending blue, Chester County is certainly becoming more of a Democratic stronghold, but it's not the bluest of areas in the Commonwealth. And she represents an area that it's, Philly suburbs, an important part of the state. In the first quarter, she raised $580,000, which is the most of any member of the state's delegation in Pennsylvania. And she has over $3 million cash on hand, which is more than John Fetterman. And it's a significant amount. And she represents more of that moderate wing of the party. So right now, of the declared candidates, we've seen more of the progressive candidates leap in the race first. However, I think we're bound to see more of the moderates jump in. And I think the battle we'll see in PA ultimately comes down to, the progressive wing versus the more moderate. And also geography is a very important conversation in Pennsylvania's politics because we know that Pennsylvania is a very big and diverse state. But right now, we've seen a lot of candidates from the Southeast declare. The more candidates that run from the Southeast, that's probably going to benefit a candidate from the West like John Fetterman, because these candidates in the Southeast are bound to split some of the vote there.
Yeah. Well, something we'll keep our eye on. John, don't go away. When we come back, I want to talk about the Republican side of this ticket. And we're seeing the same divide over there. So don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Face the Issues. John Cole, thank you again for being with us. John, I want to shift from the Democrats to Republicans now because, like I said from the start, this is not just a Democrat fight. The Republicans have their intra-party problems as well. On the Democrat side, we said more candidates have lined up for Senate. On the Republican side, it seems that more have lined up on the governor's side, at least for now. But I want to start with a larger question here. Senator Pat Toomey, stalwart, standard bearer for the conservative cause, and this is somebody who the state party has considered censuring, and a number of local parties have censured, including the local party in his home county of Lehigh County. What does this represent that's going on in the Republican Party right now?
So right now, the battle between the Republican Party in Pennsylvania, especially, we're seeing it play out in local outlets. We reported it in the state, and also D.C. publications are noticing that right now, the ongoing discussion in the Pennsylvania Republican Party is the future of the party attached and married to the Trump philosophy, to the Trump messaging, to the causes that he was advocating for, or is it going to go back to what Senator Pat Toomey advocated for when he was, again, like you said, he's more the traditional conservative, the stalwart of truly like a conservative on many issues. Traditionally, I guess the only thing you could say Toomey perhaps wasn't, conservatives may have not been thrilled with his position on gun control. Perhaps that was maybe the lone issue. But besides that, like you said, Pat Toomey was essentially a true fiscal conservative. And there was a point in time where Republicans in the state were modeled after Toomey. There was a lot of his ilk But now, again, we've seen that Toomey announced in 2020 he wasn't going to run in 2022, seek a third term. And there has been an ongoing battle, especially after he decided to vote to convict former President Donald Trump in the second impeachment trial. And that's when the floodgates really started to open on the pro-Trump people in the party, really blasted Toomey. Some calling him a traitor. I'm sure you've heard the term rhino many, many a times. That term gets thrown out frequently now. Point being, though, we're seeing this battle go on where can a guy like Pat Toomey, who is now exiting, he's exiting public office, and these pro-Trump candidates, it seems like they're gaining momentum in the Republican Party. That's the battle we're seeing right now. And at least from what I can gather, it seems as though the Trump wing is currently has momentum, at least in the primaries. And again, we'll see how that plays out in a general election, because we saw what happened in 2018 in Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. To refresh some people's memories, 2018 was a friendly Democratic year. That's first important to note. So I don't want to act like the Republican candidates themselves only lost because they embraced the Trump message. That is not a fair assessment, I believe. However, let's go back to, again, 2018, a governor's race and a Senate race. Both are Democratic incumbents, so it's not exactly easy to beat an incumbent. But Governor Tom Wolf and Senator Bob Casey both won by double digits in a battleground state. Sam, you know this well. It is not common that these races get called within minutes of the polls closing. But that's what happened in 2018. And the Republicans they beat, it was former, it was State Senator Scott Wagner, who, again, was very much embraced the Trump agenda. Even his tone and the way he, I guess, ran his campaign, it was very Trump-esque. He lost by a significant margin, again, double digits. And as well with former Congressman Lou Barletta, who was President Trump's earliest endorsers in 2016, back when Trump was a candidate, when a lot of Republicans were kind of on the fence about embracing him. Barletta is a true ally of Trump, and he lost by double digits to Bob Casey. So we're seeing that in 2018 that the candidates that ran attached to the hip of Trump, they won those primaries with ease, but they lost in the general. And in 2020, again, just before we go back to 2022, in 2020, we saw Donald Trump himself was on the ballot in Pennsylvania, and he lost to Joe Biden. Again, Joe Biden has roots in the state, so there's that was certainly important to note. But Trump wasn't able to carry the state for a second time, and two Republicans were able to pick up two statewide offices, which is very significant. Tim DeFore, a Republican, who, again, granted, I'm not saying he is definitely a Republican, but his message wasn't exactly that was aligned with the Trump wing of the party, I think it's fair to say. And Stacey Garrity, certainly a conservative. I don't know how much of her messaging was exactly like Trump, but she's certainly a conservative's conservative. But point being, in the primary, we're seeing this take place right now. We're in the governor's race. We've seen several formally declare, some announce political action committees that they're raising money. They're getting ready to jump in. A lot of the pro-Trump people are the ones who have announced it. We've not seen many people that have not embraced Trump in these races thus far. So right now, at least in the party, we'll see how it plays out on in a general election. But right now, the Trump wing of the Republican Party seems to have momentum in in Pennsylvania. One quick note too, Politico had a story. I think it was a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago. Holly Otterbein wrote it, who is from Pennsylvania herself, and I think she described the ongoing primary in Pennsylvania for Senate. I think it's like anti-Trump, like super pro-MAGA Trump, and the like pro-Trump. Like for the most part, though, most of the options are pretty pro-Trump. The anti-Trump candidates are few and far between, and those who speak out against Trump, they face pretty significant backlash because Trump, even though Trump lost statewide, he remains very popular in Republican parties across the country, and that is also the case in Pennsylvania.
When you look at the party, John, and in the conventions and things like that, do you think it's going to take at least a Trump-adjacent candidate, in the least, somebody who has not criticized the former president, in order to win the primary?
That's an excellent question. I think one of the candidates I would like to bring up first in that regard would be Jeff Bartos. He was Montgomery County real estate developer. He was the Republican lieutenant governor nominee in 2018, while Scott Wagner ran the very much pro-Trump end of that ticket. Bartos carried a different tone. He was much more the suburban Republican, traditional Republican message. He is running for U.S. Senate. He raised over $1 million. He's the highest. We raised the most amount of any Republican in that race. He's a guy to watch out for because he wasn't exactly married to Trump in the sense of he didn't always embrace the Trump agenda. But when he had his introductory video, he made sure to say Trump he made a case in his video to say Trump didn't ignore these people. Trump gave a voice to millions of Pennsylvanians who felt voiceless. So it's a candidate where maybe he's not the most pro-Trump candidate in that race, but he's a candidate that's at least he's warm. I think he needs to get the Trump candidates to warm up to him. He's a candidate to look out for, like you said, a Trump adjacent candidate. We're going to see that play out. I find it very difficult for someone to be brazenly anti-Trump to win a primary unless there's a bunch of pro-Trump candidates that run and split the vote. But sure. I think these Trump adjacent candidates certainly have a chance, and they're the ones. I would say the races to look out for would be the Trump adjacent candidates and the pro-Trump ones. That's the battle that will take place that can truly determine who's the nominees for the statewide office. The purely anti-Trump candidates, I just don't think they can survive primaries anymore. And maybe I'm wrong, Sam, but that's just the feeling I get right now in Pennsylvania.
And is there a sense, just politically speaking, right? Is there a sense that there's no point in being anti-Trump politically speaking? Because we've seen this with Congressman Fitzpatrick, that the Democrats will paint them as pro-Trump regardless of who comes out.
Well, again, statewide, it opens up to, it's truly the conversation that's going on right now. And as just a journalist, I can't speak on their behalf. But I think that ultimately I think we're going to see quite a few Trump adjacent candidates where they're going to say, hey, Trump did some good things, but they're not going to want to exactly embrace his whole agenda. A guy like Fitzpatrick's fascinating because he represents a district that voted for Biden. Mm-hmm. So he's truly in a unique category. If you're talking on a local level on congressional races, it's important to have a message that fits the district. Sure. That's so important. A super pro-Trump candidate probably doesn't win the district Fitzpatrick wins. Fitzpatrick's a unique candidate that's very tailored. A lot of even Democrats would say he's a pretty good fit for that district. But when you run statewide, that's the dilemma. There may be some Republicans out there that don't love everything Trump stands for. But if you're brazenly anti-Trump, I don't think you can win a primary. And like you said, even if you are, the Democrats most likely are going to paint you as attached to the hip of Trump. So that's the dilemma that Republicans are going to have within their party right now for 2022 and beyond, quite frankly.
Yeah, John, a few seconds here. What's your prediction for these two parties? Do you think Democrats go more progressive or stay kind of establishment? And do you think Republicans continue to embrace the Trump narrative or stay more establishment?
Well, I'll say starting with Republicans right now, just with the momentum we've seen with, again, Trump remains very popular in the Pennsylvania Republican Party. I imagine whoever the statewide candidates are for Senate and governor, they will be I'm not saying they're going to be exactly like Trump, but they're going to have to embrace some of his message. For the Democrats, that's a great question. Right now, we've seen more progressive candidates enter the race. If a lot of progressives run, that can open the field for moderate. But right now, again, it's early, but right now, there's more progressives in the race. So maybe that indicates that progressives are gaining momentum in the Democratic Party, at least in the primary.
That's something to keep our eye on. John Cole, thank you so much. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Face the Issues. My guest, John Cole. John, thank you again for your time. Look, John, I think it's a tradition that we're going to close out talking some sports here. You are a committed Philly fan. It's been, 2 seasons since you've been to the ballpark?
Yeah, in 2020, as we know, the coronavirus pandemic began. I wasn't able to go to a sporting event then, so it's been since 2019. And I'm definitely excited to finally get to the ballpark soon. I have not been yet. I've got my COVID shot. I'm very excited about that. So I think I definitely feel more comfortable going to some of these events. And we've seen in Pennsylvania, again, living in Philadelphia, being a big Phillies fan, we're seeing the Citizens Bank Park has opened up the games to, I think it's 25% capacity, if I'm not mistaken. But it's a good step in the right direction. You get the sense that things are getting somewhat normal again, which is really exciting. So I cannot wait to get back to the ballpark. And I'm sure up there in the Lehigh Valley, you'll have the Iron Pigs. I'm sure we'll be having fans at their games as well, which is exciting too. Yeah, that's right. The Iron Pigs are coming back. We've had voice of the Iron Pigs, Mike Ventola, on here with us a few times. And to your point, I think 2019 was the last time I was at a outdoor sporting event, not unlike you. John, predictions. Phillies bullpen last year gave you guys a lot of headaches. They had more, I think, blown saves than they had saves. The Dodgers, who won the World Series, had 27 save attempts, and they saved in all of them. And you got to imagine if the Phillies could do that, they would have been in a better place. What's your prediction this year? The Phillies, again, the season is rather young, but thus far that they have looked definitely better than last year. Right now, they've been around, let's say their bullpen hasn't been perfect, but it's definitely an improvement from last year, Sam. You can't get worse because last year they were historically bad. Just a terrible bullpen last year. It's the second year of the Joe Girardi era. we're hoping that, the bullpen definitely got better. The division's very good, though. That's a tricky thing. I know you're an Atlanta Braves fan. The NL East is probably the best division in baseball, and that's a tricky thing where, although I'm optimistic that the Phillies are better than last year, I truly believe that, and I think we've seen it thus far this year, that this is a better team than last year for the Phils. However, making the playoffs will still be a difficult battle because when you have teams like the Atlanta Braves sadly in your way, the New York Mets have a very good rotation, the Washington Nationals, and of course the Marlins aren't a joke either. It's one of those things where I'm excited baseball is back. I can't wait to get to a game. And for the Phillies, they're better. And it's been 10 years since they made the playoffs. 2011 was the last year. I've been waiting for, as they call it in Philly, a Red October. We haven't had a Red October in a while. But I'm hoping we're getting closer and closer to it, Sam. I'm staying optimistic, keeping the fingers crossed.
And to your point, the Mets got some bats with Francisco Lindor and others to team up with that great pitching rotation, Jake DeGrom and his cohort. So it'll be interesting to see how October goes.
They have a new owner, the Mets. Cohen went in there, and of course, when a new owner gets into a team, they want to make a big splash. And he opened up the pocketbook, and he opened the wallet up, and he spent. And I know Mets fans love that. And one last thing, Sam, for you, congratulations on Baylor's Baylor basketball. By the way, how exciting is that for you guys? The Bears winning. They won the men's. Did they win the women's as well?
Not this year. 2019, we won the women's. So last two tournaments, we have one each.
Yeah. You guys are on quite the run. I wish I could say the same about my Temple Owls, but they have not had the same success. Hopefully, Aaron McKee and company is able to turn it around quickly on North Broadsheet, but I'm sure you were able to enjoy that, and congrats on that, by the way. That's got to be fun.
Thank you very much. It's a great day for all Baylor Bears, and I appreciate that. John Cole, thank you again for joining us. That is our show for tonight. My name is Sam Chen. On behalf of all of us here at Face the Issues, thank you and good night.